On the night of March 31st, 2006, a 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State University walked up an escalator and into a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloon in Columbus, Ohio. Security cameras recorded him going up. He was captured on video, chatting briefly with two young women near the entrance, and then he vanished. He was never recorded leaving the building. Not through the front door, not through any other exit, not through any camera at any neighboring bar or business in the complex. Brian Schaffer walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloon and, as far as the cameras were concerned, ceased to exist. That was 19 years ago. He has never been seen again. Brian Schaffer was a second-year medical student at Ohio State. Smart, well-liked, and by all accounts on track for a successful career. He was athletic, outgoing, and had a close group of friends. He had a serious girlfriend named Alexis Wagoner. They had been dating for about 2 years, and Brian was expected to propose to her during an upcoming trip to Miami during spring break. He had the ring. He had the plan. Their future together seemed certain. But Brian had also been through a devastating stretch. Just 2 weeks before his disappearance, his mother, Renee Schaffer, had died from myelodysplastic syndrome, a blood cancer. Brian was extremely close to his mother, and her death had hit him hard. Friends noticed he was drinking more than usual. He seemed sadder, more withdrawn, but he was still showing up to classes, still studying, still functioning. There was no indication that he was planning to hurt himself or disappear. On the evening of March 31st, the first night of spring break, Brian went out with his friend Clint Florence. They bar hopped through the Arena District in Columbus, ending up at the Ugly Tuna Saloon in the South Campus Gateway Complex, a multi-story entertainment and retail building near Ohio State's campus. Security cameras captured Brian going up the escalator to the second-floor bar at approximately 1:15 a.m. Inside, he had a few more drinks. At around 1:55 a.m., he was recorded on camera talking to two young women just outside the bar's entrance. The women later said the conversation was brief, casual, nothing memorable. Brian appeared normal, not overly intoxicated, not agitated, not upset. After that 1:55 a.m. footage, Brian Schaffer was never seen again, on any camera, anywhere. The South Campus Gateway building had security cameras covering every public entrance and exit. Investigators reviewed every second of footage from that night. Brian was captured going up the escalator. He was never captured going back down. He was never recorded leaving through any door on any level of the building. The building had a service exit that led through an active construction zone, but navigating that route while intoxicated, in the dark, through an unfamiliar and partially blocked area seemed extremely unlikely. Cameras at 3 adjacent bars in the complex also showed no sign of Brian leaving. So where did he go? How does a man enter a building on camera and never appear on camera leaving? The disappearance made absolutely no sense. Columbus police launched a major investigation, one of the most intensive missing persons cases the department had ever handled. They started by searching the South Campus Gateway building from top to bottom. They checked the rooftop. They searched the construction zone. They brought in cadaver dogs. They checked dumpsters, sewers, and storm drains in the surrounding area. They reviewed camera footage from every business within a multi-block radius. Nothing. Brian Schaffer had not walked, stumbled, crawled, or been carried out of any documented exit. Meanwhile, everything Brian owned was exactly where he had left it. His car was still parked at his apartment. His apartment looked completely undisturbed. Nothing packed, nothing missing. His credit cards and bank accounts showed zero activity after the night of March 31st. His cell phone went dead. There was no digital footprint of any kind after that night. Brian Schaffer didn't buy a bus ticket, board a plane, he rent a car, or check into a hotel. He didn't contact family, friends, or his girlfriend. He simply stopped existing in any traceable way. There was one eerie moment, months later, that gave Brian's family a brief flash of hope. His girlfriend Alexis had been calling his phone every night since his disappearance, just to hear his voicemail. One night in September 2006, roughly 6 months after he vanished, the phone actually rang 3 times before going to voicemail instead of going straight to the recording. A cell tower ping was detected in Hilliard, Ohio, about 14 miles west of Columbus. Alexis was stunned. Was the phone on? Was someone carrying it? The cellular provider investigated and attributed the anomaly to a computer glitch. Whether that explanation is accurate has never been independently confirmed. Clint Florence, the friend Brian had been out with that night, became a point of interest in the investigation, not because there was any evidence linking him to Brian's disappearance, but because he refused to take a polygraph test. Everyone else in Brian's circle cooperated fully and passed their polygraphs. Florence's refusal raised eyebrows, but refusal to take a polygraph is not evidence of anything. Polygraphs aren't admissible in court, and many defense attorneys advise against them on principle. Florence maintained that he and Brian had gotten separated at some point during the night, and that he didn't know what happened to his friend. Brian's father, Randy Schaffer, became consumed by the search for his son. He spent years investigating on his own, walking along the Olentangy River and other waterways near Columbus, wading into the water looking for any sign of Brian's body. He appeared on television. He organized searches. He refused to give up. In 2008, 2 years after Brian's disappearance, Randy Schaffer was killed when a tree branch fell on him during a storm. He never found his son. He never got answers. Even Eddie Vedder, the lead singer of Pearl Jam, made a public appeal for information about Brian's disappearance during a concert in Columbus. Brian had been a huge Pearl Jam fan. The appeal generated media attention, but no useful leads. The smiley face killer theory, a controversial hypothesis suggesting serial killers target young men near waterways, was examined in connection with Brian's case. Both Columbus police and the FBI investigated and rejected it. There was no evidence supporting it. So what happened to Brian Schaffer? Where is he? What happened between the 1:55 a.m. camera footage and the rest of eternity? The honest, frustrating, maddening answer is that nobody knows. And that's what makes this case so deeply unsettling. It's not a mystery with missing pieces that might one day click into place. It's a mystery where the central question, how did a man enter a building on camera and never appear leaving, defies any satisfying explanation. Did he leave through the construction area, undetected by cameras, and then something happened to him outside? It's possible, but would require navigating an obstacle-filled construction zone while intoxicated and somehow avoiding every camera in the vicinity after that. Did someone help him leave in a way that avoided detection? Was there a gap in the camera coverage that investigators missed? Or did he never actually enter the bar that night, and the escalator footage was from a different moment? All of these theories have been explored. None of them hold up cleanly. Brian Schaffer was 27 years old, 2 weeks past the death of his mother, days away from proposing to his girlfriend, and on the verge of completing medical school. He walked into a busy bar on the first night of spring break, surrounded by other people his age, and the world simply never saw him again. Brian Schaffer's case remains officially open and active with the Columbus Division of Police. Tips are still accepted through their cold case unit, but after 19 years, the realistic probability of resolution grows smaller every day. The Ugly Tuna Saloona has since closed. The South Campus Gateway complex has changed. The cameras that recorded Brian's last known moments have long been replaced or removed. The night of March 31st, 2006 is frozen in time. A 27-year-old man going up an escalator, talking to 2 strangers near a bar entrance, and then walking into a gap in the footage that nobody has ever been able to close. The cameras saw him arrive. They were watching every way out, and somehow they never saw him leave. At 12:54 a.m. on May 14th, 2008, a 19-year-old college student named Brandon Swanson called his parents from the side of a road in rural southwest Minnesota. He'd driven his Chevy Lumina into a ditch. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't panicked. He just needed a ride home. It was a Wednesday night, technically early Thursday morning, and he'd been out celebrating the end of the spring semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, got dressed and drove out to pick him up. Brandon told them he thought he was near Lind, Minnesota, a small town about 10 miles from the family home in Marshall. His parents drove to Lind. Brandon said he could see lights from a town nearby. They told him to flash his headlights. He flashed them. They saw nothing. They told him to look for their lights. He couldn't see them either. Something was already wrong, but nobody realized it yet. Brandon wasn't near Lind. He wasn't anywhere close to where he thought he was. Cell phone records later revealed that he was actually near Porter, Minnesota, a tiny farming community roughly 25 miles from Lind, in a completely different direction. Brandon was lost, significantly, dangerously lost. He just didn't know it. Unable to locate each other by flashing headlights across the flat Minnesota landscape, Brandon decided he'd walk toward the lights he could see. He figured it was a town. He'd walk there and his parents could come get him. He stayed on the phone with his parents the entire time, talking as he walked through open fields and along gravel roads in the middle of the night. For 47 minutes, Brandon walked and talked. He described what he was experiencing. He mentioned hearing water somewhere nearby. He talked about crossing fences. He said he was passing through what sounded like open agricultural land. His parents tried to give directions, tried to figure out where he was, but without a visual reference or an accurate starting point, they were helpless. Brandon was walking through rural Minnesota in the dark, miles from where everyone thought he was, heading toward lights that may or may not have been the town he believed they were. Then, mid-sentence, 47 minutes into the call, Brandon said 2 words, "Oh, shit," and went silent. His parents called his name. "Brandon? Brandon?" Nothing. The line didn't disconnect immediately. It stayed open for a moment, but Brandon didn't respond. His parents hung up and called back. No answer. And they called again, and again, and again. Nothing. Brandon Swanson never answered his phone again. Brian and Annette called the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. They reported their son missing. They explained the situation. The ditch, the phone call, the walk, the sudden silence. Deputies responded and began searching the area around Lind, where everyone still believed Brandon had been. They found nothing, because Brandon wasn't there. It wasn't until later, when cell phone records were analyzed and Brandon's car was eventually located, that the full picture emerged. His Chevy Lumina was found in a ditch near Taunton, Minnesota. Not near Lind at all, but near Porter, about 25 miles away. The car's doors were open. The keys were missing. Brandon had walked away from this location, thinking he was somewhere he wasn't, and heading in a direction that took him further from help rather than closer to it. Once the correct location was finally established, search teams from multiple agencies descended on the area surrounding Porter and Taunton in force. The terrain was rural farmland, open fields, gravel roads, scattered farmsteads, and the Yellow Medicine River running through the landscape. Bloodhounds were brought in and given Brandon's scent from the car. The dogs tracked a scent trail approximately 3 miles from the vehicle, past an abandoned farm, and along the Yellow Medicine River. At a certain point along the river, the scent trail entered the water and stopped. The Yellow Medicine River was running high in May 2008. Spring snowmelt had swollen it to roughly 10 feet deep in places, far deeper than usual. The current was strong. He said if Brandon encountered the river in the dark, disoriented and possibly impaired, a fall into the water could have been fatal. But here's the thing. They searched that river extensively. Teams with boats, divers, sonar equipment, and trained dogs went over the waterway multiple times. They searched 122 square miles over the course of several years. The Lincoln County Sheriff personally walked 2 miles of the Yellow Medicine River every single day for 30 consecutive days. Horses, ATVs, aerial teams, and volunteer search parties covered enormous areas of southwest Minnesota. They found nothing, not a body, not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a phone, not a single physical trace of Brandon Swanson after he walked away from his car that night. The "oh, shit" exclamation is what haunts this case more than anything else. What did Brandon see? What did he encounter? Was it the river? Did he suddenly find himself at the edge of the water and fall in? Was it a person? Did he stumble upon someone or something in the dark? Was it an animal? A sudden drop-off in the terrain? A fence he didn't see? The 2 words suggest surprise. Sudden, involuntary surprise. But they could mean anything. And without Brandon, without his body, without any physical evidence at all, those 2 words are all anyone has. Brandon's parents never stopped searching. Annette and Brian Swanson became tireless advocates for missing persons. They left their porch light on every single night for at least 5 years after Brandon's disappearance, a signal that he was always welcome home. Yes, they lobbied the Minnesota legislature, and in 2009, their efforts resulted in the passage of Brandon's Law, which requires Minnesota law enforcement agencies to immediately begin investigating missing person reports for adults, eliminating the old practice of waiting 24 or 48 hours before starting a search. Before Brandon's Law, police could, and sometimes did, tell frantic families to wait and see if their loved one turned up. That doesn't happen in Minnesota anymore. The prevailing theory among investigators is that Brandon accidentally fell into the Yellow Medicine River and drowned, and that his body was carried downstream or became trapped beneath debris, logs, or sediment. The spring flood conditions, the darkness, his unfamiliarity with the terrain, and probable alcohol impairment all support this theory. But the extensive searches that fail to recover a body keep the question open. Rivers don't always give back what they take. And in agricultural regions where rivers meander through soft soil, remains can be buried under sediment during flood conditions and stay hidden for years or permanently. Other theories exist. Some have suggested foul play, that Brandon encountered someone who harmed him. But there's no evidence of this, no suspects, no witnesses, no indication that anyone else was in the area. Others have suggested that Brandon might still be alive somewhere, having walked away from his life deliberately. But this theory contradicts absolutely everything known about him and the circumstances of that night. He was a normal, 19-year-old college student who had just finished his spring semester and was looking forward to a summer at home with friends and family. He called his parents for a ride. He stayed on the phone with them for almost an hour. He had plans and people who loved him. He had zero reason to vanish and every reason to come home. Brandon James Swanson was 19 years old. He drove his car into a ditch on a dark, empty Minnesota road in the middle of the night, and he did exactly what any kid would do. He called his parents for help. Then he started walking. For 47 minutes, his mom and dad listened to their son's voice as he moved through the darkness, trying to find his way to safety. Then he said, "Oh shit," and the voice stopped. They never heard it again. His case remains open. The Yellow Medicine River still runs through the same farmland. The porch light at the Swanson home has been turned off, but Brandon's Law endures. And somewhere in the vast, flat, quiet landscape of southwest Minnesota, in the river, in the ground, or in whatever dark space exists between a phone call and silence, the answer to what happened at minute 47 is still out there, still waiting to be found. On October 24th, 1961, a 4-year-old girl came home from a neighbor's house in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and said something that still haunts investigators more than 60 years later. "Mommy is gone," she told the neighbor, "and the kitchen is covered with red paint." It wasn't paint. Joan Risch was 31 years old, a housewife living in a quiet residential neighborhood in Lincoln, about 20 miles west of Boston. She was married to Martin Risch, a sales executive at a paper company. They had 2 children, a 4-year-old daughter, Lillian, and a 2-year-old son, David. By all outward appearances, the Risch family was living a perfectly normal upper-middle-class suburban life in early 1960s New England. Nice house, nice neighborhood. Nothing remarkable. Nothing to suggest that on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a Joan Risch would vanish from the face of the earth. On the morning of October 24th, Martin left early for a business trip to New York. Joan had a routine day ahead. She took Lillian to the dentist that morning, came home, fixed lunch, and put 2-year-old David down for a nap in his crib upstairs. Lillian was sent to play at a neighbor's house nearby. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. At approximately 2:15 that afternoon, a neighbor driving past the Risch house saw Joan hurrying up her driveway. She appeared to be carrying something red in her outstretched arms. The neighbor didn't think much of it. It looked like she was carrying something bulky. A piece of clothing, maybe a blanket. It was a brief glimpse from a moving car. Nothing alarming. About an hour and a half later, around 3:40 p.m., Lillian was brought home from the neighbor's house. That's when the 4-year-old walked into the kitchen and saw what she described as red paint. The neighbor who brought Lillian home looked inside. The kitchen was a horror scene. Blood was smeared across the walls and floor. The kitchen table had been knocked over. The telephone handset had been ripped from its cord and thrown into the wastebasket. The telephone directory had been opened to the page with emergency numbers, but no calls had been placed. A trail of blood led from the kitchen through the garage and out to the driveway. Joan's pocketbook was on the kitchen counter. It contained less than $10. Her car was in the garage. Her passport was in the house. Her coat was in the closet. 2-year-old David was upstairs in his crib, completely unharmed, apparently unaware that anything had happened downstairs. Joan Risch was gone. Just gone. Lincoln police arrived quickly and launched an immediate, wide-scale search of the neighborhood and surrounding wooded areas. They found blood trail evidence leading from the kitchen through the garage and out to the driveway, droplets and smears marking a path from inside the house to the outside world. And then nothing. The trail ended at the road, at the edge of the driveway. Someone had either been taken away in a vehicle or had gotten into a vehicle under their own power. Forensic analysis of the blood in the kitchen confirmed it was Joan's blood type. The volume was significant, enough to indicate a serious injury, but not necessarily enough to indicate a fatal wound. She could have been badly hurt and still alive. Multiple witnesses came forward in the following days with sightings that deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Several people reported seeing a disheveled, blood-covered woman matching Joan's general description wandering along roads and highways in the Lincoln and Waltham area that same afternoon. One witness described a woman with blood running down her legs, appearing to cradle something at her stomach, walking unsteadily along Route 128. Another reported a disoriented woman walking near the intersection of Route 2 and Route 128, looking confused and injured. Whether any of these sightings were actually Joan Risch has never been confirmed. An unfamiliar dirty two-tone car had also been spotted near the Risch driveway around 3:15 p.m., roughly an hour after Joan was last seen by the neighbor. The car was described as being backed into or parked near the driveway. Its driver was never identified. The car was never traced. It remained one of the most tantalizing and frustrating pieces of evidence in the entire case. Investigators tore into Joan's background, looking for anything that might explain what happened. What they found didn't simplify matters. It made them more complicated. Joan Risch had had a painful childhood. Her parents had died in a fire when she was 8 years old. a fire that some investigators later viewed with suspicion, though nothing was ever proven. She was raised by her stepfather, and she later reported that he had sexually abused her as a child. As an adult, Joan appeared to have moved past these traumas and built a stable, comfortable life. But there was something else, something that caught every detective's attention. In the weeks and months before her disappearance, Joan had been borrowing specific books from the Lincoln Public Library, books about people who had vanished, books about unsolved disappearances, a book titled Into Thin Air, about people who had staged their own disappearances. She had checked out multiple volumes dealing with vanishings, unsolved crimes, and cases where people had simply walked away from their lives. The implications were impossible to ignore. Was Joan researching how to disappear? Was she actively planning to walk away from her life, her marriage, her children? Was she studying other cases to learn from their successes and mistakes? The library books suggested she was at the very least thinking about it, maybe even planning it. But the blood in the kitchen suggested something very different. People who stage their own disappearances don't usually leave pints of their own blood smeared across the walls. They don't rip phones off the wall and overturn furniture. The crime scene spoke of violence, not planning. So investigators were left with competing theories that have never been resolved. Theory 1. Joan staged her own disappearance. The library books were research. She cut herself to create a convincing scene, walked away, and started a new life somewhere else. The problems with this theory are obvious. The amount of blood was significant. Her money, car, passport, and coat were all left behind. Her 2-year-old son was alone in the house. No one who knew Joan believed she would abandon David like that. Theory 2. Joan was attacked in her kitchen and abducted. The blood evidence, the overturned table, and the ripped phone suggest a violent struggle. Someone entered the house, attacked Joan, and took her. The two-tone car near the driveway may have been the getaway vehicle. The sightings of a bloody, disoriented woman wandering nearby could have been Joan trying to escape or seeking help after being injured. Theory 3. Joan was attacked, seriously injured, and wandered away in a confused, disoriented state, eventually dying in the woods or a body of water somewhere in the Lincoln-Waltham area. The wooded terrain and numerous ponds in the region could conceal remains indefinitely. The wandering woman sightings support this. Someone badly hurt, bleeding, walking without direction. No theory perfectly explains all the evidence. The library books support staging. The blood supports an attack. The wandering sightings support both. The unfamiliar car supports abduction. 63 years later, nobody has been able to make all the pieces fit. Joan Rish's body has never been found. No suspect has ever been identified. No arrest has ever been made. Martin Risch eventually had Joan declared legally dead. He remarried and raised the children. Lillian and David grew up without their mother, carrying nothing but the memory of red paint in the kitchen and a woman who walked out of her own house one October afternoon and never came back. The Lincoln Police Department and the Massachusetts State Police still consider the case open. Tips are still accepted. But the realistic odds of solving a 63-year-old disappearance with no body, no suspect, and no surviving witnesses are vanishingly small. Joan Risch is out there somewhere. In the ground, beneath the water, in a shallow grave in the Massachusetts woods. Or, if you believe the most unlikely theory, in a life that no one has ever connected to a blood-soaked kitchen in Lincoln. More than 60 years later, she's still gone, and her 4-year-old daughter's words from that October afternoon still echo through the case file, as haunting now as the day she said them. Mommy is gone, and the kitchen is covered with red paint. There's a crime scene photograph from this case that, once you see it, you don't forget. A 1985 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra backed into the side of an abandoned farmhouse with enough force to breach the exterior siding. A piece of plywood that had been covering a window is lying on the car's trunk. The headlights are dark. Nobody is inside. The car's owner, a 17-year-old girl named Brianna Maitland, is gone. And she has been gone since that night in March 2004. That photograph, the car smashed into the crumbling house, sitting there like a monument to something violent and unresolved, has become one of the most haunting images in missing persons history. It's been shared thousands of times online. It's appeared in documentaries and true crime features and newspaper articles for 2 decades. And in all that time, nobody has been able to explain how that car got there, who put it there, or what happened to the 17-year-old girl who was supposed to be driving it home. Brianna Maitland was 17 years old, living in Montgomery, Vermont, a small rural town in the northern part of the state near the Canadian border. She was a junior at Missisquoi Valley Union High School, working 2 jobs to earn her own money and save for her future. Her primary job was at the Black Lantern Inn, a popular country restaurant and inn located on Route 118, known for its cozy atmosphere and loyal local customers. She was also working a second job. She was independent, strong-willed, determined to make her own way in the world, and had recently gotten into jiu-jitsu to learn self-defense. She wasn't someone who scared easily. Her friends and family described her as tough, but something had been bothering Brianna in the days before she disappeared. 3 weeks earlier, Brianna had been physically attacked at a party by a former friend named Kiali Lacrosse. The assault was unprovoked and brutal. Brianna suffered a broken nose and a concussion that required medical attention. Despite her martial arts training, witnesses said Brianna refused to fight back. It's unclear why. Maybe she didn't want to escalate things. Maybe she was caught off guard. Either way, the attack left her injured and shaken, and the relationship between the 2 young women was clearly hostile. Then, on the day she disappeared, March 19th, 2004, something else happened that spooked her. Brianna was out shopping with her mother when something outside a store window caught her attention. She excused herself, walked outside briefly, and when she came back, she was visibly upset, shaken, agitated. She wouldn't tell her mother what she'd seen or what had rattled her. Whatever it was, Brianna kept it to herself. She never told anyone. That evening, Brianna drove to the Black Lantern Inn for her regular Friday shift. She worked through the dinner rush and closed out the night. She clocked out at 11:20 p.m., telling co-workers she was exhausted and needed to get home and rest because she had to be at her second job bright and early the next morning. It had been a long week. She said goodnight, walked out to the parking lot, got in her Oldsmobile, and pulled out onto Route 118. It was a short drive home, just a few miles down a quiet Vermont road on a clear March night. She had made that drive hundreds of times before. She never made it home. She never made it anywhere. The next afternoon, roughly 16 hours after Brianna left work, someone noticed her car. It wasn't in her driveway. It was a mile from the Black Lantern Inn, backed into the side of an abandoned farmhouse known locally as the Old Dutchburn House. The car had hit the building hard enough to break through the exterior siding, leaving a gaping hole in the wall of the abandoned structure. A piece of plywood that had been nailed over one of the windows was dislodged and sitting on the trunk of the car. Inside the vehicle, 2 of Brianna's paychecks were lying on the front seat. Outside, on the ground near the driver's door, investigators found loose change, a water bottle, and an unsmoked cigarette. The car's keys were missing. There was no sign of a struggle. Brianna was nowhere to be found. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the car at the abandoned house during the overnight hours. Between 11:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m., someone noticed what appeared to be headlights on a vehicle near the house. Around midnight, the car's turn signal was seen flashing. Most significantly, a couple passing by witnessed a tall, stocky man standing directly in front of the headlights, a detail that wasn't publicly revealed until a private investigator disclosed it in 2025. A silver or gray Honda Civic was also seen speeding along the road and then braking abruptly near the scene. At approximately 4 a.m., a former boyfriend of Brianna's drove past and thought he recognized her car, but saw no one around it. He kept driving. He would later regret not stopping to investigate. Here is where the investigation failed Brianna Maitland, in a way that may have cost her any chance of being found. The Montgomery police initially treated her disappearance as a runaway situation. A 17-year-old girl who didn't come home? She probably took off with friends. She'd turn up. This assumption, made without evidence and contradicted by everything Brianna's family was telling them, meant that critical early hours and days were wasted. Brianna's car sat at the abandoned house for 11 days before it was processed for forensic evidence. 11 days exposed to weather, to contamination, to anyone who happened to walk by and touch it. By the time crime scene technicians finally examined the vehicle, whatever trace evidence might have been there was severely compromised. Brianna's family knew immediately that something was wrong. Brianna wouldn't just leave. She had 2 jobs. She had plans. She was independent, but she wasn't reckless, and she wasn't the type to vanish without telling someone. Her mother's instinct, that someone else, not Brianna, had driven the car to the abandoned house and left it there, aligned perfectly with the physical evidence. The force of the impact, the position of the vehicle, the items left behind, none of it looked like a voluntary departure. The Vermont State Police eventually took over and classified Brianna as missing and endangered. The FBI also joined. Searches covered the surrounding forests, abandoned properties, waterways, and rural roads. None produced any trace of Brianna. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Over the years, investigators pursued several leads and theories. The connection to Keali Lacrosse and the party assault was examined. Brianna's social circle was investigated for links to local drug activity. Rural Vermont, despite its postcard-perfect image, has struggled with drug trafficking along the corridor near the Canadian border. Some investigators believed Brianna may have had peripheral connections to people involved in that world, and that her disappearance might be connected to something she knew or witnessed. The name Israel Keyes, a prolific serial killer known to have operated in Vermont, surfaced during the investigation. Keyes was active during the period of Brianna's disappearance and had ties to the region. The FBI investigated a possible connection, examining Keyes' known travel patterns and timeline, and ultimately ruled him out as a suspect in this particular case. In 2006, a reported sighting of a young woman matching Brianna's description was made at a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The sighting was investigated thoroughly by multiple agencies, but the woman was never positively identified, and the lead eventually went cold like all the others. A tip in 2016 suggested that Brianna might have been held in a house connected to local drug dealers she had known. Investigators followed up with extensive interviews and searches, but found nothing conclusive or actionable. The tip, like so many others over the years, led nowhere, another dead end in a case full of them. Brianna Maitland was 17 years old. She was attacked by someone she knew 3 weeks before she vanished. Something outside a store window terrified her the day she disappeared. She drove away from work on a Friday night, and her car ended up smashed into an abandoned house, with a stocky man standing in the headlights and a silver Honda speeding away. Her paychecks were on the seat. Her cigarette was on the ground. Her keys were gone. And the police waited 11 long days to process the scene. 21 years have passed. The Vermont State Police and the FBI continue to maintain an active and open investigation into the disappearance of Brianna Maitland. Tips are still accepted through both agencies, and investigators review every single one that comes in. Her case file remains very much open, reviewed periodically by investigators who refuse to let it go cold. The photograph of that Oldsmobile backed into the wall of the Dutchburn house is the only thing that's still talking, and after 2 decades, it's said everything it can say. Whatever happened between the Black Lantern Inn and that abandoned farmhouse a mile down the road, someone knows. And for 21 years, whoever it is has kept their mouth shut. The car is still backed into the wall, the photograph is still circulating online, and Brianna Maitland is still out there somewhere, waiting to be found by people who actually showed up on time and took her disappearance seriously. She left a note for her roommate that said, "I'm not suicidal. I'm the opposite." She drew a picture of the Cheshire Cat's grin. She left a bundle of cash for rent. And then Leah Roberts got in her Jeep Cherokee and drove west across the United States, alone, chasing Jack Kerouac and whatever freedom looked like to a 23-year-old who had already buried both her parents. That was early March 2000. Leah Roberts has not been seen since. She simply vanished. Leah was 23, living in Durham, North Carolina, and struggling. She had been through more loss in her young life than most people experience in twice the years. Both of her parents had died. Her mother from cancer when Leah was in her late teens, and her father more recently. She had also survived a serious car accident that left her shaken. She had been attending the University of North Carolina, but dropped out one semester before graduation. She was drifting, grieving, trying to figure out what came next. She needed a fresh start. Leah was an avid reader, particularly drawn to the Beat Generation writers. Jack Kerouac's On the Road spoke to her. The idea of escape, of movement, of driving until the road itself becomes the point. It resonated with someone who had every reason to want to leave her current life behind and find something new. So that's what she did. In early March 2000, Leah packed her Jeep Cherokee with her belongings, clothes, books, CDs, her guitar, a cat carrier, and food for her kitten named Bee, her passport, checkbook, driver's license, and about $2,500 in cash. She left the note for her roommate, the one about not being suicidal, and she drove west on Interstate 40. Bank records would later track her progress across the entire country like breadcrumbs on a map. ATM withdrawals and gas station transactions showed Leah moving steadily westward, through Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and into California. She drove for days, sleeping in the Jeep at rest stops and campgrounds, stopping only when she needed gas or food, then pushing on toward the unknown. From California, she turned north onto Interstate 5, heading up through the heart of the West Coast, through Oregon, and into Washington State. She was heading toward the Pacific Northwest, toward the mountains and the forests and the end of the road. The last confirmed sighting of Leah Roberts alive was captured on a gas station security camera in Brooks, Oregon on March 13, 2000. In the footage, Leah appeared to be alone and in generally good condition, not injured, not visibly distressed, but security analysts who later reviewed the footage noted something unsettling. While waiting for her gas transaction to process, Leah was seen repeatedly peering out through the windows into the parking lot. She looked nervous, watchful, like she was checking to see if someone was out there, like she was being followed, like she knew she was in danger. 5 days later, on March 18th, 2 joggers running along a rural road near the North Cascades in Whatcom County, Washington, noticed something strange. Articles of clothing were scattered at the roadside near a sharp curve. Some of the clothing had been tied to tree branches and bushes along the shoulder of the road, deliberately tied, not blown by wind or casually discarded. The joggers looked down the embankment below the curve. At the bottom, severely damaged and partially hidden by vegetation, was Leah Roberts' Jeep Cherokee. It had gone off the road at approximately 40 miles per hour and crashed into trees at the base of a steep slope. What investigators found at the crash scene raised more questions than it answered, a lot more. First, there was no blood inside the vehicle, no signs of injury consistent with a 40-mile-per-hour crash, no seatbelt stretching, no glass pattern suggesting an occupant's head hit the windshield. Crash reconstruction experts examined the Jeep and reached a definitive conclusion. No one was inside the vehicle when it went off the road. The crash had been staged. Second, blankets and pillows had been hung inside the Jeep's windows, it suggesting someone had been using the vehicle as a sleeping shelter after the initial wreck, possibly for several days. Third, Leah's belongings were still inside the vehicle. Her passport, her checkbook, her driver's license, her clothes, and roughly $2,500 in cash. Nothing had been taken. Whoever did this wasn't motivated by robbery. Fourth, Leah's kitten. B was gone. The cat carrier was in the vehicle, but empty. The cat was never found. Another mystery within the mystery. Fifth, and this detail emerged years later, the Jeep's starter motor had been tampered with. Someone had deliberately disabled the vehicle so it couldn't be driven. This wasn't crash damage, it was intentional sabotage by someone who knew what they were doing. Now put all of that together and try to make it make sense. Clothing deliberately tied to trees at the roadside like some kind of signal or marker. A staged crash with no one inside the vehicle. Blankets hung over the windows and used as shelter afterward. $2,500 in cash left completely untouched. A starter motor intentionally sabotaged. A missing cat. And a visibly nervous young woman checking the parking lot at a gas station 5 days earlier. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't suicide. This was something deliberate, planned, and deeply sinister. And Leah Roberts was at the center of it. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Office launched a full investigation. They searched the surrounding forests extensively. They brought in tracking dogs. They interviewed everyone who lived or worked along the route. They checked every campground, motel, and shelter in the region. They contacted law enforcement agencies across the Pacific Northwest. They reviewed the gas station footage. They traced Leah's financial records and phone records across her entire cross-country drive. They found nothing. No body, no blood, no witnesses, no further sightings, no one who saw Leah after the Brooks, Oregon, gas station on March 13th. The case received significant national attention when it was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, and later on, the investigation Discovery series Disappeared. Both programs brought Leah's story to millions of viewers and generated a wave of tips to law enforcement. But not a single one of them led anywhere productive. Every lead went cold. Over the years, investigators have pursued various theories and persons of interest without making an arrest. Yet the leading theory is that Leah encountered someone during her road trip, possibly at a campsite, a rest stop, or along the highway, and that this person either followed her or traveled with her into Washington state. The nervous behavior at the Brooks gas station suggests she may have already been aware of a threat by March 13th. Whatever happened between that gas station and the staged crash site 5 days later resulted in Leah's disappearance and likely her death. The tied clothing at the roadside has never been fully explained. Was it a signal? A marker? Was Leah trying to leave a trail? Or was it placed there by whoever harmed her? For reasons that only make sense to the person who did it. The tampered starter motor suggests someone who didn't want the Jeep to be driven away. Someone who wanted to control the scene. Someone who took the time to disable a vehicle, arrange clothing on tree branches, and push a car off a road at speed, all of which requires planning, physical effort, and time. Leah Roberts was 23 years old. She had already lost both her parents. She had survived a car accident. She had dropped out of college 1 semester short of her degree. She left North Carolina because she needed to move, needed to breathe, needed to find something on the other side of the country that felt like a beginning instead of another ending. She wrote a note that said she wasn't suicidal. She drew a Cheshire Cat smile. She packed her Jeep with everything she owned and drove 3,000 miles toward whatever was next. Something found her first, somewhere between a gas station in Oregon and a curve in a road in Washington. Someone intercepted Leah Roberts' road trip and ended it. Her Jeep was staged. Her clothing was tied to trees. Her money was left untouched. And she was gone forever. 25 years later, the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office still has an open case file and no answers. And somewhere in the dense, silent forests of the Pacific Northwest, between an Oregon gas station and a Washington mountain curve, whatever happened to Leah Roberts on those lost 5 days is still hidden among the trees. The Cheshire Cat is still grinning from that note she left behind. And the road she was following just stops somewhere in those dark Pacific Northwest woods. This is the one that makes seasoned homicide detectives shake their heads. Not because it's gory, not because it's complicated, because it's impossible. A 19-year-old kid walked out his front door in broad daylight on a sunny Wednesday morning in a safe residential neighborhood in Omaha, Nebraska, and vanished. No witnesses, no evidence, no struggle, no body, no trace, nothing. One veteran detective who worked the case called it the most baffling disappearance he'd seen in 30 years of police work. That was over 20 years ago. Nobody has gotten any closer to solving it since. Jason Jolkowski was 19 years old in the summer of 2001. He lived with his parents and younger brother in a quiet neighborhood in the Benson area of Omaha. He was shy and soft-spoken, at the kind of kid who kept a small circle of friends and didn't go looking for trouble. He had graduated from Benson High School and was working at a Fazoli's restaurant, a fast casual Italian chain, earning money and figuring out his next steps. Not a party kid, not involved in drugs or anything remotely risky, just a quiet, normal teenager working a food service job in Middle America. On the morning of June 13th, 2001, Jason was called into work early. His shift at Fazoli's wasn't supposed to start until later, but they needed him sooner. There was just one problem. His car was in the shop. He couldn't drive himself, so he arranged with a coworker to get picked up at Benson High School, which was 8 blocks from his house. Half a mile. A straight walk through a residential neighborhood he'd walked through hundreds of times before. Around 10:45 a.m., a neighbor saw Jason outside his house helping his younger brother pull trash cans back from the curb. That's the last confirmed sighting of Jason Jolkowski. He was wearing a white Chicago Cubs t-shirt, black dress pants, black dress shoes, and a blue Cubs baseball cap. He was carrying his red Fazoli's work shirt, ready to change when he got to the restaurant. At some point after 10:45, Jason started walking the 8 blocks from his house to Benson High School. The route was straightforward. Residential streets, houses on both sides, people home during the day, no wooded areas, no isolated stretches, no construction zones, no tunnels, just sidewalks and front lawns in a neighborhood where people mowed their grass and waved at their neighbors. Between 11:15 and 11:30 a.m., Jason's coworker called the Jolkowski house and said Jason had never shown up at the school. Less than an hour had passed since the neighbors saw him pulling trash cans. In that window, somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour, Jason Jolkowski disappeared from a populated residential neighborhood in the middle of a sunny Wednesday morning without leaving a single trace. The school had security cameras. None of them showed Jason arriving. He never made it to Benson High School. He vanished somewhere along those 8 blocks between his house and the pickup point. Omaha police were contacted and responded quickly once it became clear that this wasn't a case of a teenager sleeping in or deciding to skip work. Everything about the situation was wrong. This wasn't a teenager who ran away from home. His wallet was at home. He had no money on him. He had no history of running. He had no enemies, no debts, no secret life, no involvement with anyone dangerous. There was absolutely nothing in Jason Jolkowski's background that would explain why someone would want to harm him. Detectives canvassed the entire neighborhood between Jason's house and Benson High School. They knocked on every door. They talked to every resident who was home that morning. Nobody saw Jason walking. Nobody saw a struggle. Nobody heard a scream or a commotion. Nobody noticed an unfamiliar vehicle cruising the area. In a neighborhood full of houses with windows facing the street, on a Wednesday morning when people were home, not a single person saw a 19-year-old in a white cup shirt walking down the sidewalk. How is that possible? Searches expanded outward. Dogs were brought in. Parks and open areas within a widening radius were searched. Dumpsters were checked. Abandoned buildings were entered and cleared. Ponds and waterways in the broader Omaha area were searched. Cadaver dogs hit on nothing. Air searches produced nothing. Volunteer efforts involving hundreds of people turned up nothing. Jason's friends, co-workers, and extended social circle were all investigated and cleared. Nobody had a motive. Nobody behaved suspiciously. Nobody's timeline didn't add up. In the weeks and months following the disappearance, not a single credible tip pointed investigators in any productive direction. The case attracted national media attention. It was featured on multiple television programs. The Jolkowski family appeared on camera, made public appeals, distributed flyers, and did everything in their power to keep Jason's face visible. None of it generated a breakthrough. The case wasn't going cold because detectives weren't trying. It was going cold because there was literally nothing to investigate. No crime scene, no evidence, no witnesses, no suspects, just an empty stretch of sidewalk where a teenage boy should have been walking and wasn't. Years passed. The Omaha Police Department periodically revisited the case. New detectives inherited it. Fresh eyes examined the same evidence, or rather the same absence of evidence. Each new review reached the same frustrating conclusion. There was nothing to work with. It was as if Jason Jolkowski had stepped through a door in the fabric of the world and pulled it shut behind him. Jason's parents, Kelly and Jim Jolkowski, channeled their grief into advocacy. Yes, they founded Project Jason, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families of missing persons. The organization provided resources, support networks, and public awareness campaigns for missing persons cases across the country. They also successfully lobbied for the passage of Jason's Law in Nebraska, which established a statewide missing persons network and improved coordination between law enforcement agencies handling disappearance cases. Kelly Jolkowski once described her son as a quiet boy with a small handful of friends. She said he wasn't the kind of person who made enemies or attracted negative attention. He was just a kid walking to meet his ride for work. That's it. That's the whole story, up to the point where it stops making sense. The theories that have been discussed over the years are few and unsatisfying. Yet the most commonly cited is that Jason was abducted by someone in a vehicle, that a car pulled up alongside him as he walked, and he was grabbed and taken. This would explain the lack of witnesses if it happened quickly enough, and it would explain the absence of any physical evidence along the route. But it raises its own questions. Random stranger abductions of adult males in broad daylight in residential neighborhoods are extraordinarily rare, and there was no sign of a struggle anywhere along the 8-block route. Another theory suggests that Jason may have accepted a ride from someone he knew or was vaguely familiar with, someone who offered to drive him to the school and then harmed him. This would explain why there was no struggle visible to neighbors, but every person in Jason's life has been investigated and cleared. The Omaha Police Department continues to investigate. They acknowledge openly that they have virtually nothing to work with. 24 years later, the case remains exactly where it was on June 13th, 2001. A 19-year-old walked out of his house, started toward a school 8 blocks away, and never arrived. No evidence, no body, no answers. Jason Jolkowski was wearing a white Chicago Cubs shirt, black pants, and a blue cap on the morning he disappeared. He was carrying a red work shirt for his shift at Fazoli's. He was walking through a neighborhood he knew like the back of his hand, on a clear sunny morning with people all around him. And somewhere between his front door and a high school half a mile away, something happened that left no fingerprint, no fiber, no witness, and no explanation. That's what makes the Jason Jolkowski case fundamentally different from almost every other disappearance on record. It's not that the evidence is confusing or contradictory. It's that there is no evidence. None at all. Zero. A human being disappeared under the safest, most observable conditions imaginable. Broad daylight, residential street, houses everywhere. And the world didn't notice. 24 years later, it still hasn't. And that silence is the loudest part of the whole case.